This is your favorite talk of the day. It's 8:45. The talk of the day. I know how it feels. I feel the same. I have planned for a 45-minute talk. I'll make a deal with you all, though. I'm going to ask a question. If I get even one answer, one correct answer, I'll condense the talk to 20 minutes. We can all go home quick. What do you call a bee that lives in the United States?
USB.
There we go. 20-minute talk. Easy. So before I go into Markdoc, as you already know, this is one of really cool tech in the content space recently. I'm super hyped, super excited about it. I've used it plenty in the last few months, and I love using Markdoc. And I want to show you all why I like and love Markdoc and users, so you can go find its users in whatever you're doing. We have Jaws at the back. Last year, Stripe open sourced this tool called Markdoc. So Jaws was playing around. So we were having conversation. Jaws was building another tool, another documentation website for a tool that he was building called Emery. The documentation website was built with Markdoc. So we had some conversation. Oh, why Markdoc? We always use the MDX. What's so cool? It's so new. It's not mature yet. And then it's mature yet. It can do all these things. And we started exploring. And we have a Keystone.js website. It's built with MDX. And we have Emma. We work with Emma at ThinkMill. Emma migrated our Keystone.js website from MDX to Markdoc. There was a spark moment. All the problems we had before with MDX, problems in the sense, they're not really problems, but more, hey, you got to remember this. You can't do this. If you change this, it's going to break. There were so many, you were carrying the mental load with MDX. The moment we migrated our Keystone website to Markdoc, they all went away. That was a spark moment. So that's when I started exploring, playing around with Markdoc, lots of tools, Astro, Markdoc in the last few months, and found Markdoc is a graduation in the content space from where long time ago, we started with HTML, then we moved to Markdown, then we moved to MDX. Now Markdoc is like a superset. It's like a big brother for all of them. It solves all your problems in a lot of the simpler ways. Hello, my name is Dinesh Pandiyan, and if you haven't already figured out, I got a shirt here. I work with all these wonderful folks at ThinkMill. Today, before diving deep into Markdoc, I want to take us all a walk down the memory lane of how we've been using content the last 10, 15 years before. A very, very long time ago, I was using this commerce framework called IBM WebSphere Commerce. It's very similar to WordPress, but it's even older than WordPress. When you're building things, you don't change code. You open the content at admin UI. We were writing CSS, JavaScripts, and all your HTML in content. We can't preview it. You have to deploy to an environment, so which is a 1 hour change before you can actually see the change. I'm pretty sure some of you all remember doing that a long time back. You can't preview all those things. So we were getting back to how many of you here have heard about Markdoc before this evening? Show of hands, please. Yes, this is going to be a good talk. How many of you have used MDX in your daily work? MDX. Nice. How many of you have ever written Markdown? A GitHub README. There we go. Next question. I'm really hoping all the hands go up. How many of you have written HTML? 46. There we go. Cool. Talking about HTML rich text. Today, when we are talking about content, we are going to focus more on rich text content that's not just a string, but it has how you format string, how you display a string, how it's a paragraph, whether it's a heading, or all the metadata that needs to be stored along with the string to help whatever you're rendering to know how you want to style and render. So generally, over the years, you might have known if you used lots of content platforms anywhere, your content is traditionally stored as data in a database. It could either be a database or it could be a file pull from an FTP server somewhere external to your system. And the other side of this content as code. If you have built any static websites, lots of the design system documentation websites you might have seen. We have Atlassian's design system website. It's built with Gatsby. A lot of your content is co-located. So the two concepts we're going to explore today is content that lives alongside your code. It's just static content, just a file. Your devs can change it, but not others. And the other concept is content as data, where content doesn't live with your code. Your code uses it, but constant content comes from an external source, either like a database or wherever it is, it's not your code. Now, when we are looking at HTML, where we're writing rich text content, I'm not sure if it's visible at the back, but we're having a bunch of HTML tags here. We have a H1 tag, H2 tag, paragraph tag. Now, if you're a developer, you know how this changes. But if you work building websites for others, quick marketing websites, quick copies, as Simon mentioned, you will always have someone tapping on his shoulder. Hey, we need to change this. If folks who own business requirements, who want to change things, they're usually not the people who are actually building and maintaining the website. So there's a divide now. There are people who know how things have to move forward, and then there are people who can make the change, but sometimes they're not the same. So when you have your rich text content as HTML, what happens is only the developers can change it, not others, which means whatever you're seeing here, this is not a human-friendly representation of content. So whenever you put your content as HTML, only devs can understand it. Other people can't easily understand it. But when you're writing code as HTML, it's just tags. You can have all the custom elements you want. You want to build a carousel? Yes. Want to write a code, write some JavaScript, you have your carousel there. You want to build a node panel? Yep. It's always just a few more divs here. Add a few more divs, you got that there. If you want to add a YouTube or Twitter embed, add a few more divs you want there. And the content here, this content can live in your code. This content can also be pulled from somewhere. So this content, this whole HTML is just a string. You can compress it as a blob, send it to your server, pull it from somewhere. So whenever your content is in the HTML format, only devs can understand, so it's not human-friendly. But you can have all the custom elements you want. That's custom elements in the sense elements that are more than what you commonly know as rich text. Elements outside paragraphs, elements outside headings, styling outside italics and bold. And your HTML can be both co-located with the code and also come from an external source. Now, from there, having your content as non-human friendly, where developers are only people who can change it, we want to graduate from there. So from there, we graduated to we started using Markdown in our websites. If you all ever written GitHub README, so you don't really write HTML, although you can because they have a GitHub flavor Markdown. But the idea is when you're writing content as Markdown, it's a lot more human-friendly. So what you're looking at here is there are no HTML tags here. This is a friendly syntax. It's friendly for anyone who wants to write Markdown. All they need to know is they just need to remember what the syntax is. So whenever you're writing your content as Markdown, it's human-friendly. But then again, we lost this customization. In Markdown, you can't have, can we embed a YouTube element video here? No. Can we embed a carousel here? No. Because Markdown is a specified set of syntax you can use. Anything that's outside the rich text specification in the common mark spec, which is usually very few elements, all the headings, inline formatting like bold, italics, these are the only syntax available within Markdown. So we moved from HTML wanting to solve the human-friendly problem, but we created one more problem. Yeah, we are limited by what we can put into our content. So we can't have fancier, nicer things in content, interactive things in content. Okay, we want to solve this. Now we graduated from Markdown, and we went to MDX land here. Now, so the idea of MDX is it's still content's graduation from Markdown, but now your content will very closely be coupled with code. So what you're looking at here is up until above the first section, so everything is what you see as software Markdown. Content is more or less readable. You can have custom elements in MDX. Because look at this, you have an import, you import YouTube component, you're importing from the syntax. But now if you notice, our content is very closely coupled with build tools. When you write this, you need to know where you're importing your components from, not just you. Your server or wherever running, when the build tool you're using, it needs to be context aware of all the components you're using in MDX. It's an extension of Markdown. A lot of people say it's human-friendly. It's there. It's human friendly for up to until you use Markdown. But whenever you're using other content, you need to know the syntax. It's very specific. It's not something you can hand it over to other people as spec. It is very closely tied to implementation detail. For example, if I remove the import statement there, everything is going to stop working. Or if someone changes the whatever the code is there where the import is, it's going to break. So now your content is very closely coupled with your build tool and your source code. This content, you cannot convert this into a string blob and put it into a database or somewhere else. This can only live within your code, which means you can't have nice things where you can let other people change it without us tapping on your shoulder. Now we bring the responsibility to change back to us, back to engineers, back to developers. All right, here's my favorite part. Now, Markdoc, I see it as a graduation from MDX. Markdoc is the same content. It gives you everything. But in Markdoc, everything is still just content. There is no coupling. All the things, all the little nuances we saw in other types where we add content, it doesn't exist anywhere in Markdoc. What you're looking at here, it's the same as what we saw before, but the last part here, for people in the back, is it's not an import. You don't, the content here is not coupled to your code. You can put this content within your source code. You can put your Markdoc content in a database. You can put it in a different file. You don't have imports, so you still are able to use custom elements that are outside the common Mark specification. For example, if you want a carousel, yep, just add an extra carousel element here. Now, this has no context-aware knowledge of how it's going to be used, because now your content and your code abstraction, they live separately. That means you can build lots of good abstractions and tooling over it. Markdoc does a lot more things. The same content can be rendered in different renderers. Imagine if you build a really good tooling around it, use all the modern front-end infra, you can really bridge the gap between technical people and non-technical people and let everyone edit the content and let technical people own the infra. Imagine if someone built a really cool tool to do that and gave it away for free. Oh, wait, we just saw that, didn't we? That's pretty much the intro about Markdoc. Before we go into how Markdoc works, the idea of Markdoc is you want your content to be content, you want your content to be decoupled from your code, and you want your content to support custom elements that are not supported in default Markdown specification, and you want your content to be human-friendly, so everyone can read, edit, make changes without being afraid of the code. And Markdoc achieves that by two things. One, the way it works, and two, the way it's built to work. What I mean by that is, in all of the times, you will see content as a separate entity. In Markdoc, your content always comes with a config along with it. Anytime you have Markdoc content, each piece of content has a config coming along with it. So whenever you store Markdoc anywhere, if it's decoupled from your code, it means it lives along with the config it carries over. And the way Markdoc works in 3 steps. I'm going to quickly move over this so we can show you there in code. Markdoc works, you have your content goes through parse layer. Parse content is transformed into a tree. The transform tree is rendered in whichever framework you're using, whichever language, whichever tool you're using. That means the reason why this is different from other tools is other tools you read and you render. It's very close. Now, when you have 3 layers of parsing and rendering, what it means is if you use MDX with plugins like Remark plugin, that all happens in the second phase. So first phase is purely reading your string and transforming it into a rich text tree. It's just an AST. It is a JavaScript representation of what your content is. And now you pass it through a transform phase. You can do lots of cool things. You can run validations against your content. You can add specific attributes against your content. You can build so many tools against your content in the transform layer. And the third part is render tree. So since your content transformation is separate from your rendering, what that means is same content can be rendered by different websites in different places in different themes. So which means your content is not very closely coupled with what you're building. you can build 6 different websites with 6 different, all with its own constraints, with its own teams, with its own systems, with its own components, but they all consume the same content. I'll show it then. That's how I explored Markdown and figured out. That's what I did last year. So we used a single piece of content to build 4 different themed websites. Cool. Before we quickly see a demo, this is directly from the Markdoc website. The team says that Markdoc completely decouples everything from your code, no dependency on the build system. It's all just JavaScript. So what that means is you can write your own renderer. Markdoc team, they give you a React and HTML renderer, but whichever language you're using, you can write your own renderer. While exploring Markdoc 6 months ago, as you all have heard, Astro is one of my favorite tools. I started exploring Astro before Astro became mainstream. It was still in alpha. Now, so I built a renderer for Astro for Markdoc, and I called it, as the name goes, Astro Markdoc Renderer. It was good. It was really troublesome because at that time, Astro didn't even have docs around how their build tool works. So it was a lot of digging into source code, and I reached out to their team. It was really fun conversation. So the whole idea of how Astro, when it came out for content, it came out with MDX. Astro had no context around Markdoc. So when I started playing around with all the information, we had a discussion with the team, and I reached out to their Discord, and we started talking about, look, if you look at Markdoc does a lot of those things, and based on how your tooling works, Markdoc can solve so many problems that MDX cannot, which means you can do so many cool things around Markdoc. And what that conversation went to, RFC opened a conversation, and then this went to die because Astro team officially after that released their own Markdoc plugin. So which is really cool. So if you're using Markdoc with Astro today, definitely don't use the package I built. This is going to be good. Time for some demo before we all go home. Oh, well. Can you all hear me? Yeah, cool. If anything's not visible, give a shout out. I will make things bigger. Cool. Zoom. And I got code here. Zoom. Can you all see the code? Yep, easy. I have 4 examples here. Same content with HTML, Markdown, and MDX. So I'm going to go through the default syntax we use for rich text, and then I'm also go through one custom element in all these 4 formats. First one. So everything you're seeing here, this is the default rich text format is supported in all tools. There's no custom elements. All are semantic tags where we can make text bold, we can make text italics, we have headings, H1, H2, we have a paragraph tag. So this is just HTML. So what you're seeing on the left is just your HTML. So with HTML, everyone this can make the change, but this is not really for everyone. You need to be aware of what you're changing. You got tags here. Now, if we move on to Markdown, it is the same content we saw before, exact same content. But instead of writing in HTML, if you write the same in Markdoc, this is a lot friendlier, isn't it? Do you all agree? Yeah. This is more readable. Even I like looking at Markdown than HTML, and I write HTML every day. So which makes it, this is where we're transcending from content being very closely tied to code to content being content. Same, we go to MDX now, same MDX example. If you notice, MDX and Markdown now are literally the same. There's no difference at all. Because MDX is more like a superset of Markdown. MDX can do more things Markdown can't, but when you're not using any custom elements, when you're only using the semantic elements, MDX and Markdown, they look exactly the same. Same with Markdoc, nothing fancy. It's exact same content. If you wrote the same thing in Markdoc, it's going to look like that. Do you see any difference at all? It's the same Markdown, because Markdoc is also a superset of Markdown. So when you're not using custom element, only using the semantic elements that are in common mark spec, you get the same content in Markdoc as well. Do you see this extension MDOC, Markdoc? You might have noticed in the demos, Jed and Simon showed as well. But the fun fact that is Markdoc doesn't really have an official extension. It is not a prescribed format. So the way Markdoc tool works, it just asks for the file. And it hasn't been standardized, the extension yet. So I can even change this extension to Dinesh and it will just work. There's no problem there. So in Stripe's documentation, they go with MD. So they don't believe Markdoc is a separate format. Their idea thinking is Markdoc is just Markdown. But if you pass it into Markdoc's compiler, you will get some niceties with you. Cool. Now, Internet is not just semantic tags. You need some little fancy elements in there. So I'm going to add a custom YouTube element. Imagine now, adding YouTube videos is part of content. If you want to add it to HTML source code, it's going to be here, but it's going to take, I wrote this code, but it's going to take me at least 10 seconds to understand what that code means. See? So this is not a standardized spec, or this is not a standardized tag. We don't have a YouTube tag. What we do, we need to find the right semantics to build a YouTube element, which is a composite of other things. You can't give this to non-devs to make an edit. Well, you can, but you're gonna find what's going to break then. Now, doing the same customization, custom component in Markdown, well, you can't do it because Markdown is limited with the spec. So Markdown is based on a spec called common mark. So whatever you're seeing here, these are the only things you can do with Markdown, and nothing more, nothing less. So Markdown's as good and as friendly as it is, it has its limitation. So Markdown cannot do custom elements. It can only do the semantic tags or semantic elements that are available in the spec. Now let's see how to add a custom element in MDX. Look, we got the YouTube video in MDX as well. When we do the same with MDX, this is how your code is going to look like. This is all content, but look at the last piece. This is code. This is okay. This is rememberable. You can teach people to use this tag when you want some complex thing that's not available as semantic element. But this won't just work. It has to be imported from the right space. I make this go away, website is going to break. Now, if someone else owning the space, if it's come to a different path that my team or I don't own, YouTube becomes ZTube or ZooTube. That's going to break. The reason is now your content, what you're seeing here, is very closely coupled with your code. You can't take this content and put it in a database. You can't take this content and give it to someone else. You can't take this content and put it in a different remote source. Oh, look at the magic now. We got custom elements with Markdoc. The same, nothing changes, but same content, no imports, but at the end. So Markdoc gives you the syntax called tags. So they call the default Markdown spec as nodes, and what you can customize is called as tags. So you're telling Markdoc, YouTube is a tag. This, if you notice, this is still a string. Yeah, it's not coupled to anything. And this is where Markdoc's parse, transform, and render phase comes in. So this Markdoc, along with it, it comes a spec. So, sorry, the config. All Markdocs carry a config with it. Config is just a JSON. I've written as JavaScript, it's just a JSON. Sorry. Now, in my config, I'm saying, oh, my content is going to have a special tag, complex element called YouTube. And this render is for telling the renderer. Whenever YouTube renders, you can try to map it to a component called YouTube embed. And now I'm saying URL and labels are the attribute for this YouTube. And self-closing. So the config is a bit elaborate. You can go into docs and find more of it. But the way it works is, tag name is YouTube. It has two attributes, URL and label. You go to custom tags. That's what we're doing here. Tag name is YouTube. We got two attributes, URL and label. And this gets directly transformed into whenever we are rendering this content, Markdoc index. So content goes to the first phase. So this raw text is actually coming from the file. First phase, content is passed into an AST. If I run the server console log, you will notice it is just a tree. I'll show it to you in the website. Second step, past content is AST is transformed into a content with this config. So this is where all the validations, all the constraints we put around our content gets transformed in the right, using the right information we have given to the system. And now this content can be rendered in any renderer. So this is Markdoc's React renderer. I just imported here, markdoc.renderer.react. And you can pass custom components while rendering. So this is as simple as it is. If you observe closely, what this means is MDX, everything is very closely coupled. MDX and Markdown, they do the same thing. You get done the same thing. Output is the same. But when you want to bring the human element in, when you want to give control to others, you should only give the content, not the rest of your ecosystem and tooling. And that's what Markdoc provides an opportunity for. So we own the rendering part, parse and transform part, but the content can be completely, absolutely separate. That's the reason I put it in a separate folder. The separate folder could be pulled from a data. I'll show that as well. Here. See, this is just an await, which means asynchronously we are loading this content, which means this content can come from anywhere. It is not coupled to anything. All it needs is the content needs to fly around with a piece of config. That config could be a JSON coming from anywhere, or it could be a prescribed spec that you've written for your project. That's pretty much it. I'm trying to, okay, I told 20 minutes, it went 25, but we'll go back. Oh yeah, we want to look at Markdoc sandbox. Okay, this is how Markdoc works. Past one is AST. So whatever you're looking here, this is a I'll zoom it in. The Stripe has built a live playground for Markdoc. Yeah. So your content looks like content. There's no fancy stuff here. It gets rendered right, but the first step is AST. So this is just a JavaScript object, nothing fancy, no build tool involved, nothing involved. You just send your string, you get a JavaScript object. First step, Markdoc passes and gives you an AST. This is your AST. AST stands for Abstract Syntax Tree. So you're constructing a tree from the content. Second step is this tree gets transformed into a renderable tree for your renderer. This is where all the validations and all the constraints you put in your content system works in. So if you notice, this AST tree is pretty raw. I'll show you. First element is a heading because that's a H1 element. And first element has children of, it says text node of value this. So it's a very deep AST tree. But once it converts into renderable tree, it becomes simpler. It gives very prescribed information for your React renderer or Astro renderer, Svelte renderer, whichever renderer you want to use. You can use all renderers as well. See directly, this is the element, this is the heading. The second element would be paragraph. P tag, this is the value. Third element is the custom tag. So it's going to say call out because that's the config. And it's going to give the children for it. So now the renderable tree means it's ready for render. And when you pass the renderable tree to React or whatever renderer you're using, voila, you get the output. So now you can imagine this. So key static does a lot of cool things around the possibilities Markdoc opens. And now it has an interface that's exposed to users who don't want to meddle with code. And now this config and content, the interface updates directly in the source code. You can reverse map it. Cool. That is, I think, all my friends. And as a closing note, the one at the right top here, this is the documentation website for Emory that Joss built. That was the first website that I've seen built with Markdoc. And we use that as source of inspiration. Emma migrated our MDX to Markdoc in Keystone website. Looking at these both, I want to play around with Markdoc. So I first built an Astro theme with Markdoc. 2, 3, 4. All 4 themes I built with Markdoc. And that's when I realized, yeah, Markdoc is a graduation in the content space. We can do so many cool tooling magic when we use Markdoc in whatever we are building. That's all, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.